Caught in the grip of guilt and regret? In this video, I'm going to show you how to overcome these debilitating emotions once and for all. Through a series of actionable steps and practical exercises, you will learn how to conquer these limitations and reclaim control over your life. So get ready to break free from the shackles of guilt and regret and discover a new path of freedom and happiness. If you're experiencing guilt and regret, it should be obvious how it affects your well being. It also limits your potential because you're likely more fearful of making a mistake or failing at something and experiencing more guilt and regret. So there's things that we've done, there's things that we've tried, and even with good intentions, things haven't always worked out well. And depending on what happened in these situations, we will experience guilt and regret. And that makes us much more afraid of doing more. The last thing we want is to pile on more guilt and regret. But it's time to move on from that. I want to start off by telling a story about someone who I had coached who was experiencing a lot of guilt and regret. I don't remember if she was born in the US, but she grew up in the US, and she was of Indian descent. Her parents would take her back to India to visit relatives, like once a year. And she noticed how much wealthier she and her family was compared to her cousins and her extended family. And this made her feel guilty at a young age. And she made a commitment to herself that she was going to solve the poverty problem in India. Now, I think that's not that doesn't sound probably so crazy to a child. Maybe she was, I don't know, maybe 12 years old when she thought this. And that sounded normal to her, like, you know, I can do this and I'll do it for my family, and very noble intentions. Now, to us, that sounds a bit crazy that one person could solve such an enormous problem in a country. And at 12 or whatever age she was when she made that choice, not understanding the power structures in place that prevent a country from prospering or for all of its people to prosper. So she had really no idea what something like that entailed at a young age. And for some reason, she held on to this commitment. And when she came to me for coaching, she was in her early 30s, and we were getting to the bottom of what she was feeling so guilty about. And this didn't come out right at first, but then she eventually told me that this story about committing to solving this problem. And I said, "Well, did you give yourself a deadline of when you had to solve this problem?" And she said, "Yeah, 30. By the age of 30, she wanted to have solved this problem." And now she was past 30. And that's why she was experiencing the crippling effects of guilt and regret. And so we went through the rational stuff first before I really started bringing in NLP and some of the processes that I use. I wanted to make sure that rationally she understood that this was really unfair. Noble commitment and something she could strive to do for her entire life. Whether or not she solves that problem in India, that's okay. But to think that you would have solved this problem by the age of 30, we went through those rational understandings, and she said, "Yes, I understand that that's an extremely lofty goal that is quite nearly impossible." But she was still holding herself to it. And that's whenever I started saying, "Okay, well, let's look into what your intention was with this. What was your intention?" And so I elicited her values around the intention to overcome this problem of poverty in India by the time she was 30. And she told me the stories about her family and how she felt guilty about it and everything. And the number one value that came out of this was kindness, that this would fulfill kindness. And this is what kindness meant to her. That was really what she was aiming at fulfilling by doing this. And so I said, okay, after this coaching call, what's something kind that you can do, that you can do immediately after this call, that you don't have to depend on anyone else. You can just go and do it. And it's accessible. It's right here. It's right now. And she didn't even hesitate. She says, well, I have an elderly neighbor and I could just go check on her and that would be kind. And I said, well, how would you feel about that? And she said, well, that would feel really good. And she got it. And she realized right then that to fulfill your values is something you can always do right now. There's always a way. Now you can set these big lofty goals and withhold that fulfillment of that value from you until you achieve it. But I haven't seen anything that makes that useful in any way. To achieve more, you might say, is a point of doing that. But I think you can do that even better if you allow yourself to be fulfilled and satisfied along the way. Now, to her, she wasn't allowing herself to feel like she was a kind person until she had achieved this thing. And then she gave herself until 30 and didn't achieve it. So not only did she violate one of her values, her perception of herself was that she was unkind because she couldn't achieve this. And she was carrying around this guilt and regret for the longest time. The next session that I met her, the guilt and the regret was gone. She connected with her kindness and realized that she had been just really unfair to herself to hold her to solving such a big problem. And I encouraged her, there's no reason why you can't work on this problem and help in any way that you can. And allow that to be kindness. Don't allow the accomplishment, whether or not you accomplish it, to dictate whether or not you're a kind person. So when it comes to things that we regret, and when it comes to guilt, know that those feelings mean that you violated one of your values, possibly more than one. So think of something right now that you feel guilty about or that you regret. Now, like I normally recommend when I ask you to find a situation to work with, don't pick the level 10 worst thing you've ever done to try this out on, because you could get very emotional and before even finishing the process, uh, go into what we call like a collapse state. So choose something a little more mid-range so that you can understand how this works. And then once you have been through this process and you understand how it works, then go and apply it to something much bigger. But I don't recommend doing the worst thing possible, the worst, hardest worst thing you've ever done, most regretted, most guilty thing, the first time, because you might get too caught up in the feelings. So think of something you regret. Think of something you feel guilty about. And ask yourself, what value or values did you violate in this situation? To the woman who I was speaking about, she violated kindness in her mind. And kindness was one of the most important values to her. So it could be more than one value. So find out what was the value you violated. And then another thing you can ask yourself, whatever action you took that didn't turn out well, what value were you trying to follow? What was your intention? What was a positive intention of what you did? They might be the same value, but not always. So the value you violated, or values if there's more than one, and the value that you were following, the value that you were intending to fulfill in whatever it was that you did. So, for example, I was out with my kids one time at one of the beaches here in Santa Cruz, and it was one of those rocky beaches. And my kids were climbing on the rocks, and I was taking pictures and some video. And my son slipped, and he caught himself. And so I put my camera down for a bit, and I was like, "Okay, guys, be a little more safe around here." And then later, I thought about what if he had slipped into the water, and it was the water was like rushing in between these two cliffs where it was very narrow, and it was causing like a loud sound and this kind of a suction sound whenever the water rushed back out. And I suddenly had this like vision of my son falling in there, and then what would I do if I jumped in? I might drown myself, and he might drown, and it just horrified me to think about it. And I felt like I had violated, just by not being more proactive, I had violated um, all of the values packed into being a parent, like being cautious, being safe with my kids. And this looped around in my mind a bit. And I did that process that I introduced yesterday to break that loop and to help me go into the future being more cautious, especially when my kids were small around situations like that. So one of the values I was following was there were some beautiful images, and I was, it's a beach, and I was taking pictures. I could do a value solicitation on that, and it was probably around being creative. That was the value that I was following. But in being creative, I was being a little neglectful in watching my kids. I should have been watching them closer. So I violated the value of being safe, or being safe with my kids, or being attentive to my kids. So those were two separate ones. But sometimes the value that you violate is the one that you were actually trying to follow. You were trying to fulfill. Maybe you were trying to be nice to someone, and their response, or maybe you're trying to be kind to someone, and their response was they were mean back to you. So not only did you not fulfill your value of being kind, you may have felt like you violated it as well. So here's the thing: when you know what your value was that you violated, and you know what the value was that you were trying to fulfill, when I've done this process with people, that right away sometimes gives them such huge relief, just understanding this, that they'll get emotional, but it's like an emotional release. They had all this pent up guilt and regret about this. And when they realize that they're feeling the way that they feel because they violated one of their values, just in that understanding alone, there's tremendous relief. But we're not done yet. So once you know what that value is that you violated, you can understand now that that negative feeling that we call guilt and regret, the degree to which you feel bad about this is also a measure or an indication of how important and committed you are to that value. So you can feel good about feeling bad. Think about that. I wish I could take credit for this teaching. It does come from my mentor, Steve Andreas. So if you watch my other live about values and how important they are, you know that when you align with your values, when your behavior aligns with your values, you get fulfillment. You feel good about yourself. Your self esteem goes up. Your confidence goes up. When you violate your values, the opposite happens. You feel guilt and regret. But if you know what values you violated, now we can do something with this. The first thing you can do, like I said, is understand that you're feeling bad about it is a measure or an indication of how committed you are to that value and how important it is to you. The next thing that we can do is make amends. So maybe the situation where you have this regret or guilt might have involved someone who you will never see again. That could happen, right? And I'll come back to that. But if it involves someone you know, then how can you make amends to that person? What can you do that will then align with the value you violated to make amends with that person? And sometimes it's as simple as that. For the lady from India, or she was Indian, I don't know if she was born there. Her making amends was finding something very simple she could do right then and there that aligned with kindness, and seeing how easy it actually is to fulfill that value. And it doesn't matter how small the action is, it's relevant. Any behavior or action that you can do that aligns with your values is relevant. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a lofty accomplishment. It all counts. So ask yourself, how can you make amends to that person in a way that fulfills the value that you violated? And if it's somebody you will never see again, like as in a stranger, or unfortunately, sometimes family members or friends have passed on. So there's nothing, can't go back and make amends directly to them. But you can ask yourself, what can you do? Maybe it's charity, or doing something nice for someone that would align with that value that you violated. It could be a stranger, could be, could be someone else. Doesn't have to be the person. Allow yourself to be creative and coming up with ways that you can make amends that way. How can you right the wrong, in other words? Now, hopefully you've walked through this as I've been explaining it. And if you have, ask yourself, what is a more resourceful state to be in? Is it more resourceful to know the value that you violated, as well as your willingness to make amends? Is it a more resourceful state to continue to be in a state of guilt and regret? I think it's pretty obvious. Being in guilt and regret is not serving you. A lot of times we get stuck here because we feel like we deserve it. I should feel bad, right? I should feel bad about what I did. Okay, maybe. Maybe right at first, so that that feeling bad draws your attention to the value that you violated, so you can do something about it. Not so you can just sit there and feel bad about yourself. That's not helping you, and that's not helping anyone else. So the more resourceful state, I will argue, is understanding what happened here, understanding why you feel bad, and then start coming up with ways that you can make amends and fulfill that value that was violated. I think that's what feeling bad is there for us to understand. I think it's there to alert us to the times when we goof up, so that we can do something about it, not so that we can just sit around and feel bad about it. I mean, if you think about it, how do you think guilt and regret affects your well-being? And a lot of us have carried guilt and regret around for so many years that we've forgotten how heavy the burden is. We're used to it to a certain extent, and we think, well, that's just how it is, right? Until we shed that burden. We let go of the guilt and regret, and it feels unbelievably light. You go, wow, I don't know how I was carrying around that burden for so long. Not only do you feel lighter, you usually go into a much more resourceful state of possibility. You're less afraid, especially of moving forward and doing new things, because you know if you do anything that you might feel bad about, you know how to correct it. You know what's going on. You violated one of your values. The feeling bad lets you know how important this value is to you, and then do something about it instead of just sitting there. And if you're experiencing guilt and regret and you're not convinced, you think you deserve this, then I would say, okay, for how long? What's it going to be like 5 years from now, still feeling guilty and regretful? If you carry that around for another 5 years, how will that affect your life? Especially, how would your life be different 5 years from now if you finally resolved the guilt and regret? In 5 years, you can look back and realize it's been a lot better. It's been a much better 5 years without the guilt and regret. And if you're still not convinced, think about 10 years from now, still carrying around guilt and regret. What's that going to do to your life over the next 10 years? 20 years. 20 years of dragging around guilt and regret that you could let go of right now and spare yourself that 20 years. So I hope that's convincing. You feel free to use the other techniques that I've given you in these other lives. I also put another PDF in the description of this video about letting go of resentment. And that was inspired by, I had a situation where my daughter stopped talking to me. And it was so easy to slip into resentment over that. But I realized that that was not going to get me, it was not going to bridge the gap between us. And so I went through that process that you'll find in that PDF, which is in the description of this video. And it saved me a lot of resentment. And now my daughter and I have the best relationship we've ever had. So it worked. So in conclusion, overcoming guilt and regret is really about understanding that you violated one of your values, and perhaps one or more of your values went unfulfilled. When you truly understand this, you can then do something about it. It does not help you to continue to punish yourself with negative feelings that limit you and overall harm your well being. There is no way to guilt and regret yourself to the point that you no longer have guilt and regret. You have to transform it. So I recommend stop punishing yourself. It's not getting you any closer to resolving it. It's more about understanding it and then taking action. All right. Let's see. Questions. What about guilt about doing something horrible like bullying in the past? Will there still have been a value I was following? Yeah, there was probably a value that you were following. I'm sure you understand the value that you violated. But why do people bully? I don't think I know the answer for that for every person who does it. But I can tell you, chances are that person was bullied. If you're the bully, then you were probably bullied. And this was your way of asserting yourself or trying to get back control. There's all sorts of theories around bullying. I'm not a bully expert. But everything we do, every behavior we do comes from a positive intention. Now, some people will say, well, how could bullying come from a positive intention? On the surface, no. But if you go deep enough, and any behavior, if you go deep enough, we're always doing behaviors in the attempt, it's not always successful, but in the attempt to fulfill a value. There's nothing that you do that is not intended to fulfill a value. Everything you do has an intention. Another word for intention is value. So you don't do things for no reason. So a bully is doing something to fulfill something. Maybe it's to, like I said, to feel a greater sense of control, especially if the bully is also someone who's being bullied. That's trained in behavior of how to gain control over a situation. See, it's strange how similar what you talked about yesterday is to Neville Goddard's revision technique, and that it was said to actually change the course of events, what he called a bridge. His name keeps popping up a lot. I'm not familiar with any of his stuff, but I'm not surprised that there's this stuff connects. Something's useful and it works. There's usually a connection. How would you apply this to missed opportunities and wasted time? Ooh, that's a good one. I have felt that a lot in my life. I think it's the same thing. So by missing out on an opportunity, what value did you violate? It could be like, I don't know, being proactive, productive, motivated. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's really the same thing. But that's a good one because I think sometimes people don't think of it that way. But I would include that because I've experienced a lot of regret over things that I missed out on. And here's the thing: uh, if you've had those missed opportunities, times when you could have done something and you didn't, if you just experience the guilt and the regret, you're so likely to continue that kind of behavior. It's a strange thing, right? You would think it would be, "Oh, well, I missed that opportunity and I regretted it, so I need to make sure that I jump on the next opportunity." It often doesn't work that way. But when you do this, when you understand that you violated a value and then you get clarity around all this, when that opportunity presents itself again, you're more likely to jump on it when you go through this process. I value honesty, but in dealing with people who are clearly lying, being deceptive, I have no issue altering the truth as protection. I feel smart rather than guilty. Is this incorrect? Well, I'm certainly not judging you. Um, I think, if you're not feeling guilty over it, it sounds like you're fulfilling a value of protecting yourself, which is definitely valid. And my only thing would be just be careful about anytime you are in a situation where it's and there are times when it's better to not tell the truth. I get that. But I would recommend that you put yourself in situations where you don't have to lie. The more the more you can remove yourself from situations like that, the better. You don't want to get into the habit of deception. So that's all I would say about that. But I think if you've got to protect yourself and you have to not be completely honest in order to protect yourself, that's okay. I mean, sometimes we have to do that. For me, it feels heavy and toxic. I'm not sure what you're referring to. So I got this 2 years ago. Thanks, Damon. It's now second nature for me. Oh, good. Why sometimes guilt and regret makes me feel wanting punishment and suffering and defeat unto myself. Then my subconscious makes me do more of the same thing I regret, then more self punishment. Okay, you definitely need to do what I'm telling you here, because it sounds to me the only way you know how to deal with guilt and regret is to punish yourself, and that's probably behavior that comes from how you were raised. I was raised the same way, and so I have this had those same feelings as well. But what I'm showing you here is a different way to deal with that. And like you're saying here, the more I punish myself, the more I do the things that I regret. You're kind of locked into this loop unless you intervene with the process. This process here is a good process to use to intervene on that. I'm just thinking about how guilty I feel about something that happened 3 years back and how that completely changed the way I live and came across this live. Well, I'm glad you made it to the live. And I hope this has really helped you. Because yes, we either going to be shaped by the limitations of negative experiences that we use to make negative generalizations and negative beliefs, and that will shape our lives, or we can make positive beliefs that align with our values and that will shape our lives. Which one do you want? I mean, it seems pretty obvious. Um, the whole point of this is about making conscious choices rather than unconscious choices. Most of us are playing defense in life. A lot of our choices are knee jerk reactions. We want to be more responsible than that. We want to be more conscious than that and understand what we're after and make really good decisions that way. Can't get out of the cycle and feel worthless and deserving nothing good. Makes no sense, but I do what will make me feel guilty later on. Well, try this process. Um, like I said, there's no point in being stuck in guilt and regret. It does not serve anyone. Thanks for these calls, Damon. Very generous of you. My pleasure. Thank you. You're welcome. Have you tried the DeMartini method at all, Damon? It's great for reframing. I can't say that I'm familiar with DeMartini method. I grew up around that Catholics, they are experts on punishment. Well, it depends on the Catholics. I was brought up Catholic, and that was my experience, exactly what you're saying there. But later in life, I met other people who were brought up in the Catholic faith. And when I shared with them my experience, which I thought was kind of like a universal Catholic experience, they were like, I did not grow up like that. That was not my Catholic experience. So I don't pretend that my Catholic experience growing up is everyone's Catholic experience growing up. I've talked to people who have had really good experiences in the Catholic faith. So, whatever works for you and whatever doesn't work for you, try something else. See, could any of this looping on doing those things over and over be at all related to the current perceived inability to be able to make the better choices, even if they align with our values? Okay, let me read that again. Could any of these looping on doing those things over and over be at all related to the current perceived inability to be able to make the better choices, even if they align with our values? Yes. And this, if you take what the live that I did yesterday and combine it with this one, especially to work on this stuff, like if you have those looping memories, that's a dynamite combination. Works really well together. But yes, like I said, so let me take a different emotion. So there's guilt and regret that we're talking about here. But let's take different emotions like anger and fear. Okay, sometimes people come to me and they say, I want to get rid of my anger, or I want to get rid of my fear. And what I'll say is like, I don't want you to get rid of those things because they're quite useful. The same thing as guilt and regret. Not regret, I would say guilt, or the beginnings of guilt and regret, not the long-term feeling, because guilt and regret kind of have it implied that it's like an ongoing, continuing feeling, and that's not what I mean. Anger and fear is really good for alerting you to a situation that you need to pay attention to. Carrying around anger and fear long term is not good for you. It doesn't help you any. It doesn't help you make better decisions. It blinds you, if anything, right? People are blinded by anger. They're blinded by fear. We don't make good decisions angry or fearful. So the analogy I like to use is think of fear and anger, and we could say regret or guilt, that negative feeling when we violate our values. Think of them as an alarm clock. Okay. The purpose of an alarm clock is to wake you up. Sometimes guilt, fear, anger is good for waking you up. But what if I took my alarm clock and it's gone off, it's buzzing, and instead of shutting it off, I carry it with me all day. And when people come up to me and say, "Hey, would you shut that thing off? It's really annoying." And I say, "No, I need to let it go." And they say, "Well, why?" And they say, "Just in case I fall asleep." Okay, silly, right? So use anger and fear and guilt as a way to wake you up to something that needs to be dealt with. And then let go of the emotion so that you can deal with the thing and move on. So we don't want to get rid of these things. Guilt and regret initially is good for waking you up to a value that you violated. And then you can stop and say, okay, I need to do something different here. And the same goes for fear and anger. Bring your attention to something. It's good for bringing your attention to what you need to pay attention to. Once you've got that information You don't need to carry the emotion with you any longer. The emotion has done its job. Let it go. There was a saying that Alan Watts, maybe he was repeating like a Zen saying, but he was talking about like you get on a raft to cross a river. And once you get over the river, now it's time to cross the mountain. You wouldn't take that raft and put it on your back and carry it up the mountain. There's no use for it. Same thing goes with anger and fear and guilt and regret. All right. See, I choose survive Catholic school. It's the only Catholic thing, huh? Hi, I'm from Brazil. I just want to say thank you for your content. You're very welcome. Good stuff, Damon. Thank you. We'll bullet point the steps of the process again, please. So take the thing that you feel guilty or that you regret. Ask yourself, what value or values did I violate? That's the cause of you feeling bad. Understand that the degree to which you feel bad is an indication of how important and committed you are to that value. That kind of changes the game, doesn't it? Also, know you want to be aware of what value went unfulfilled. What were you trying to do that didn't get fulfilled? What was your intention that didn't get fulfilled? And then ask yourself, what can you now do that would fulfill those values and make amends, either to that person or, if you're not going to see that person again, how could you still make amends? And then for the missed opportunities, same thing. What can you do now? What can you do now to align and fulfill those values? You're still here. You're still around. You can still do something. And that taking action is really important. When you take action on this, it changes things. It's not just about thinking it, it's action. See, I think the best thing you can do for the people you hurt is let go of the guilt. Carrying it does nothing for no one, and holding on to the guilt doesn't stop the same from happening again. Completely agree. The analogies help. Good. I watch you every day now. I appreciate all of your help. Oh, well, thank you. This is a great live, learning so much valuable things. Have been using shame and guilt to punish myself. Yeah, that's how a lot of people do it. And that often is how we're raised, right? And not all households, but shame and guilt as a way to get us to do things. And so we grow up and we go, oh, well, now that I'm out of the house and my parents aren't here, how am I going to get myself? How am I going to rein myself in? And a lot of times we just do it to ourselves. We shame and guilt ourselves. I see this a lot when people are trying to lose weight and eat healthier. They shame and guilt themselves, thinking that they can do that into getting themselves to diet and exercise. It might work temporarily, but long term, it's a really bad strategy. All right. One more thing I would ask you to do, I haven't been doing this as much, is write in the comments here your big takeaway from this live. If you felt like you learned something, solidify that knowledge by putting it into words, writing it down. And a great place to do that is right here in the chat box. Have you done a live on how to let go? I assure you, this is a great way to let go. This is, in fact, I'm trying to think if there's any other way that I know of to let go. This is really the way. It's it's knowing the value that you violated and then taking action to fulfill it, the amends. Shame just leads to more comfort eating. Yeah. Shaming and guilting yourself to try to lose weight, or I see that probably most common in that, and it just doesn't work. I mean, if you think about it, we know trying to shame and guilt other people into losing weight or any of those things, that never works. And it doesn't really work for anything else. Like I said, temporarily, you might be able to move yourself in a certain direction, or you might be able to do that with other people. But long term, guilt, regret, shame, those things they're not good strategies. They're destructive and they don't work long term. I feel guilty watching your live after I done in yesterday and today. Your voice puts me in a trance. Oh, well, hopefully, maybe I can put you in a trance of not feeling guilty, or maybe you should just do the exercise. No longer feel guilty. There's no reason to. So I'll watch this again and focus. Okay. All right. Well, we are halfway through. Yeah, 15 straight lives and 15 more to go. Do you have the energy for this? Can you handle it? Can you keep doing it? I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to myself. Only kidding. No. I enjoy this too much. I look forward to this every day. Um, I get to share what I love teaching this with all of you, and I can't think of anything I would rather be doing. So thank you for showing up. I hope you take what I give you here and all of the other lives and use it. And I hope to see you on the next 15 lives. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for all the kind words, everyone. Okay, well, take care, and I will see you tomorrow.